Hey there, fellow classic comic collector. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I want to talk to you about a comic that I've already talked to you about in the past. That's this one here. It's my copy of Action Comics 252, the first appearance of Supergirl. I'm getting a lot of glare here. That's because I have my computer screen open because of some things that I want to share with you about this comic book. Of course, it's a well-known comic. It's a big key issue, and as I mentioned, I have talked about it before. When I did my top 50 comics in my collection last year, which again is now wildly out of date because I spent so much time and money during the pandemic buying a bunch of cool books, including a lot of key issues that are now in my top 50. But at the time, one of the books that is definitely still in my top 50 was this here, Action Comics 252, the first appearance of Supergirl. But since then, I've had a little bit more has come up about this particular copy that's made it even more special for me. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. One thing I love with comics is the history of the comics. I'm not, that concerned with the grade. I love the provenance. I love the stories, like the history of having the comic is one reason why today, when you can get everything digitally, I still love to have the originals. I love things like date stamps. To a lesser degree, things like store stamps, things that have the personal history of that comic, where it came from. What I particularly love is if the previous owners have written their name on it, either on the front cover, the inside cover. It doesn't really matter to me. I know some people don't like to have the writing on it, but for me, it's just part of the history of the book. I used to have a large run of Sergeant Rock as one of the many, many long runs that I ended up giving up on for one reason or another and then getting rid of. But at one point I had, I think, 250 issues of Sergeant Rock, maybe about 200 issues of Sergeant Rock. And a whole bunch of them from around 1970 were all from the same collection, what I call the Kunkel collection, because they all had the name. There were two brothers, and one of the last name was Kunkel. They had written on the front cover, and I had like 20 issues from their collection. I loved it. I love that sort of thing. So when I went to my LCS. This was about 6 years ago, maybe now, and maybe 5. And there's certain issues that they know I'm looking for, and the store owner pulled me aside and said that they had gotten in an Action Comics 252, and they wanted to know if I wanted first crack at buying it. And so they showed me this copy of Action Comics 252. Now it's a low grade copy. It's about a 2.5. And it has some issues. It's maybe a 3. It's pretty nice for a low grade book. It does have, as I mentioned in my previous video, there's a small tear here. It's only this long. It was sealed with an amateur tear seal at some point. So technically it has restoration. I pointed that out to the LCS when I bought it, and they said they didn't really think it affects the grade, considering how low grade it is. And I basically agree with that because, it's a 2.5 or 3 either way, and I could pay to have it removed, but if I really wanted to, I could just re-tear that open and done. It would just have a note that there was tape on the inside of the front cover, and that wouldn't affect the grade. So I ended up buying it. At the time, I paid $400 for it, which was vastly more than I had ever paid for a back issue. Before that, the most I had ever paid was about $150. So for spending $400, it was a big investment for me at the time. But one thing that they pointed out is that there was writing on the cover, and there was someone's name on the cover. And that person's name is right here. And as you can see, it's Dennis Kitchen. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dennis Kitchen, you can easily Google him because he's a really important, well-known figure in comics, specifically in underground comics. Starting in the late 60s, Dennis Kitchen was working in underground comics with a lot of famous underground creators. He ended up becoming the publisher of a lot of underground comics, and then he ended up founding Kitchen Sink Press, which was like the premier publisher for underground and indie comics for decades and decades. And so he's a major figure in the history of comics. And he spells his name with only one N. So when I saw this, there's probably not that many people named Dennis Kitchen to begin with, but the number of people named Dennis Kitchen with just one N who are also comic book collectors specifically is very small. You can see it also says Supergirl here, written under the A. And so I was like, this is great. Not only do I love it when people have their names on the covers anyway, but to have a comic that was originally owned by such an important seminal figure in comics, to me added a lot of value rather than detracting from it. So that was one of the factors in deciding to buy the book. Obviously it's worth more now. It's probably worth 2.5 times as much now as when I bought it. It has DC books have lagged behind Marvel in terms of the huge explosion in prices over the last year. But, I'm certainly happy to have it. Supergirl's a character that I love the character. A lot like Wonder Woman, I think it's a great character that has been underserved by having a lot of really, really crappy stories over the decades. But it's great. And I've shown this to people before, and I'm like, and in my previous video, I was like, it's got, the kid's name on it with Dennis Kitchen. And I had a few people contact me that were like, are you sure it's the real Dennis Kitchen? Was it really his? Was it someone else's by that name? You should reach out to Dennis Kitchen. And I was like, I don't know if I really want to do that. So eventually, though, I did. And I think I might have mentioned this in the comments of that video. But I did reach out to Dennis Kitchen, and that was the email that I had up here. He verified that this was in fact his copy. He said there's a certain pen that he used. The Supergirl is written in it's like a turquoise ink. It's a different kind of ink, and he said that was very common. He would frequently write his name with that pen on the covers. He said there's a specific thing he used to write on some of the back covers, where he would write I Heart Pamela, because that was like a neighbor girl that he was in love with. And it was just really, really great to get the personal history behind this. And he was really happy to see it again, because he had decades and decades ago, back in the 60s, gotten rid of a lot of his old collections. And so he was really happy to see it, and that made me really happy to be able to show it to him and to be able to get the history behind this. He also put me in touch with another collector who similarly had found some comics at a comic show that had Dennis Kitchen's name and had verified with Dennis that they were his. So I talked to that collector as well. And there's this sort of the love of comics that is sort of passed down. I think we as comic collectors owe a huge debt to the previous generations of comic collectors that kept these books when so many, particularly books from the 40s and 50s, where the vast majority of those were destroyed, sometimes intentionally destroyed during the 50s. But there were these people then that loved comics as much as we love comics now, and kept the comics and preserved the comics and collected the comics so that now we would be able to have them. I look at myself as a custodian of my collection, because eventually these are all going to go on to other collectors who hopefully appreciate them and preserve them for future generations of collectors as well. I don't really even, I own all these books, but it's all temporary. The books will hopefully outlast me, and there'll be lots of collectors after me that will enjoy these. So I'm really happy to have Dennis Kitchen's personal copy of Action 252 and have that connection with him and these previous generations of collectors. It really adds so much to me, value-wise, in terms of personal and emotional value to this book. This is a book that this would definitely be one of the last ones out of my collection, not just because of the importance of the issue, but because of all of these extra things around the issue that really make it special for me. So I just wanted to tell that story. I'm always on the lookout for things that have cool stuff like that, like kids' names, but I've mentioned this in a video before, but in terms of romance, there was one time on the CGC forums where someone was selling a bunch of low-grade romance, and one of the books he had, the person who had owned the book at the time in the early 70s had written a practice Dear John letter on the back cover, breaking up with her boyfriend. And unfortunately, someone else bought it before I saw the thread where I saw it up for sale. That's when I've been kicking myself for years. But that's the kind of thing that I absolutely love. Those sort of the stories around the comics, not just the stories in the comics, but around the comics. I just love it. So that's it. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, about highlight one of my favorite comics in my collection and why it's a favorite to me and why I would rather have this low grade copy than a much higher grade copy, because this has, been loved, um, and it just means more to me that way. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.